Welcome to Midnight Tales, where we deliver the most thrilling and suspenseful supernatural stories. Prepare your heart, as each story has the potential to send shivers down your spine. Join us as we unveil the mysteries of the deep night together. The story of the urn. On a tranquil night, the sharp sound of alarm bells echoed through the corridors of the nursing home, breaking the usual peace. Nurse Xiao Li and senior nurse Lao Jiang stood before Miss Chang's urn, looking at each other in bewilderment. Lao Jiang's face was etched with determination. He firmly believed that it was Miss Chang's soul seeking freedom. Though filled with doubt and fear, Xiao Li eventually followed Lao Jiang's instructions and slowly approached the window. Her fingers gently touched the cold window frame, took a deep breath, and then forcefully pushed the window open. In an instant, a gust of cold wind blew in from outside, carrying an indescribable chill. The night outside seemed to grow even darker, and the wind seemed to carry faint sobs, as if someone was weeping in a low voice. Xiao Li couldn't help but shiver, feeling an inexplicable sadness and unease. Lao Jiang stood quietly by, his gaze fixed on the window, as if communicating with some invisible presence. The alarm bells abruptly ceased, and the nursing home fell into an eerie silence once again. Xiao Li looked back at Lao Jiang, who wore a faint, relieved smile. "She is finally free," Lao Jiang whispered, his voice tinged with sorrow. The fear in Xiao Li's heart gradually gave way to an inexplicable sense of being touched. She began to contemplate that perhaps Miss Chang's soul had indeed been confined within the small urn, and her longing and persistence had finally been released. The next day, the elderly residents of the nursing home were all talking about the unusual events of the previous night. Some claimed to have heard voices in the wind, while others thought they saw a vague figure floating down the hallway. But no matter what they said, Xiao Li and Lao Jiang did not disclose what had happened the night before. As time passed, the story of Miss Chang became a legend within the nursing home. Whenever the night fell quiet, some would claim to feel a gentle breeze blowing in from outside, as if it was Miss Chang's soul watching over the place she once lived. Xiao Li, after that night, gained a deeper understanding and respect for life and death. She began to believe that even after death, a person's soul has its own desires and pursuits. She took even greater care in attending to each elderly resident of the nursing home, hoping to provide them with warmth and dignity in the final stages of their lives. As for Lao Jiang, he remained the taciturn senior he had always been, but his eyes held an added depth and tranquility. He knew that some secrets do not need words. They would ride the wind, drift into the distance, and become eternal legends. The child at the General Hospital. During a night shift at a general hospital, Nurse Kobayashi was preparing for her final round before turning off the lights. The hospital lights gradually dimmed, and only occasional whispers and footsteps could be heard in the corridors. Kobayashi was an attentive nurse, always ensuring that every patient was properly cared for during the night. When she arrived at the emergency stairwell, she noticed the door slightly ajar, which struck her as odd since no one usually used the emergency stairs at this hour. She gently pushed the door open and was taken aback by the sight. A child of about 3 years old, dressed in a patient's gown and holding an IV stand with one hand, stood there quietly, with his back to her. Kobayashi's first thought was that the child might be lost. She softly asked, "Young one, what's wrong? Do you need help?" But the child did not respond, just stood there quietly as if listening to something. Kobayashi moved closer and noticed that the IV bag on the stand was not yet finished. which made her even more concerned. She asked again, "Do you know where your room is? Let me take you back." However, the child still did not react. At that moment, Kobayashi's phone rang. It was another nurse urgently calling for her. She told the child, "Wait here for me, I'll be right back," and hurried away. When she returned to the emergency stairwell after handling the emergency, the child was gone. Kobayashi began to search the hospital, but no matter how hard she looked, she could not find the child. She asked other nurses and doctors, but no one was aware of the child's existence. Kobayashi started to doubt her own eyes, and even her sanity. However, when she mentioned this to a senior nurse, the nurse paused for a moment and then shared a chilling story with her. A few years ago, a 3-year-old child had passed away in the hospital due to illness. That child, in his final days of life, always liked to take walks in the corridors at night, pushed in a wheelchair by a nurse. He always said he wanted to see the outside world, even though he had never been able to leave the hospital. Strange occurrences at the elderly hospital. In an elderly hospital in Kanagawa Prefecture, night shift nurse Ono was busy organizing medical records at the nursing station. The hospital had a long history. The lighting in the corridors was always somewhat dim, and the paint on the walls had begun to peel. Despite the somewhat outdated facilities, the medical staff here dedicated themselves to caring for every patient with all their hearts. Late at night, Ono was making his rounds in the corridor, ensuring that every patient was fast asleep. As he passed a patient's room, his gaze inadvertently swept to the end of the corridor, where the figure of a young woman in a yukata was strikingly out of place under the dim light. Ono was startled. He knew the hospital only admitted elderly patients, and it was impossible for there to be a young female patient. He stopped and observed the figure closely. Her hair was long, almost covering her face, and she moved slowly and hesitantly, as if searching for something. Ono's heart raced as he realized this might not be a human being, but a ghost from legend. Gathering his courage, he slowly approached the figure. As he neared, he noticed that the woman seemed oblivious to his presence. Her eyes were empty, as if staring at a world only she could see. Ono tried to communicate with her, but no matter what he said, the woman did not respond. At that moment, Ono's phone suddenly rang. It was another nurse urgently calling for him. He had to turn away to deal with the emergency. When he returned to the corridor after handling the situation, the woman had vanished. The next day, Ono shared his experience from the previous night with his colleagues, but everyone thought he might have been working too hard and was hallucinating. However, Ono was certain of what he had seen. He began to investigate the hospital's history, hoping to find the origin of the ghostly woman. After some effort, he uncovered a heart-wrenching story. Decades ago, a fire had broken out in the hospital, and many patients and medical staff had unfortunately perished. Among the victims was a young nurse who had sacrificed her life to save patients during the fire. It was said that her soul had remained in the hospital, searching for the patients she had failed to save. Ono was deeply moved by this story and decided to do something for the young nurse. He planted a cherry blossom tree in the hospital's backyard in her memory. Since then, the staff and patients at the hospital said they had never seen the ghost of the young woman in a yukata again. Ono believed that the nurse's soul had finally found peace, and her story had become a beautiful legend within the hospital. His experience also led him to a deeper understanding of life and death. The deceased patient's earrings. In a quiet hospital room, senior nurse Xiao Yai was performing the final care for a patient who had just passed away. The patient was a kind-hearted elderly lady who always wore a smile and was very friendly to everyone in the hospital. Her passing cast a faint sadness over the entire hospital. Xiao Ya gently wiped the old lady's body and arranged her clothes with tender and meticulous movements, as if she were caring for her own family. When she finished all the work and was about to leave the ward, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her ear. She instinctively touched her ear and found that the earring she had been wearing was missing, replaced by a small trace of blood. Xiao Ya was puzzled and panicked. She searched everywhere for the earring, but the ward was empty except for the old lady's body. She began to suspect that she might have accidentally lost the earring while handling the body, but the earring was tightly fastened and could not have fallen off without reason. At that moment, Xiao Ya noticed that the old lady's hands were folded on her chest. She walked over and gently separated the old lady's hands, only to find the earring lying quietly in the palm of the old lady's hand. This scene shocked Xiao Ya. Her heart raced, and an inexplicable fear welled up inside her. She took a deep breath and carefully took the earring from the old lady's hand. She did not understand why the earring had ended up there, but her intuition told her that this was more than a simple accident. She remembered some stories circulating in the hospital about the souls of the deceased, and she began to suspect that the old lady's soul had interacted with her in some way. Xiao Ya put the earring back on, and she felt a strange connection, as if the old lady's soul was communicating with her through this method. She decided to keep this secret buried deep within her heart, but her views on life and death changed from that point on. Since then, Xiao Ya has become even more attentive and considerate when caring for terminally ill patients. She believes that even at the last moments of life, the soul still possesses a certain power to connect with the living. As time went on, Xiao Ya became one of the most respected nurses in the hospital. Her story spread within the hospital, becoming a mysterious and beautiful legend. The earring also became a symbol of the special connection between Xiao Ya and the old lady, reminding her that the dignity and value of life never disappear, even in the face of death.